Good morning again. Let's start with the panel discussion on vehicle and autonomous things security. So the overall theme, or the kind of the starting kind of opening story or vision or observation, is that cybersecurity is no longer about cyber, or not just about cyber. It's really about the security of a cyberized physical world or physical systems. So I always start with a bunch of recent stories that resonate with this observation. Last year at a kind of a very traditional technical research conference in cybersecurity, a group of researchers from UK and Germany demonstrated the feasibility of cloning a kind of a keyless remote entry, remote control of a European-made vehicle by just doing some reverse engineering on that original key, and by listening to just one session of the interaction between the real key and the vehicle. And then they can actually clone a remote, maybe not as beautiful as the original one, but equally powerful in remotely opening or turning on that vehicle remotely, hundreds of feet away. So this kind of sounds very scary, and I heard that the authors were faced 2 years ago. They faced a lawsuit from that European automaker, and they ultimately were able to get out of that trouble and publish the paper last year. So that one actually received a lot of media coverage because this is kind of highly unconventional, not the traditional type of cybersecurity research papers that we read right out of conference like that. And also, many of us heard about some of the recent incidents like Uber, Tesla. They both experienced some accidents or incidents with their self-driving vehicle. I believe in the case of the Tesla accident, that was actually a fatal accident. And in response, in light of Uber's recent autonomous driving vehicle accident, they temporarily, halt the program, right, just to review the risk and the issues in that. And I have two more stories. And recently, I read an article about hackers being able to hijack a high-end law enforcement UAV worth more than $40,000 using a $40 commodity remote. And they can do the hijacking from 1 mile, 2 miles away from that UAV. And this is more local. So my research group has been working on a bunch of vetting effort in studying the vulnerabilities of commodity legacy control systems in UAVs. And we found out that there exist many vulnerabilities, not just in the program, but also in the control models themselves. And that actually opens the door for all kinds of manipulation, including hijacking or drone crashing. Basically, you can just program the drone, right, once you get over the control. And surprisingly, if you look at the control program, sometimes you don't even find any of those traditional program-level vulnerability. No overflow, no control flow, integrity violation, nothing. It's all semantics. So now, the more I study this problem, the more I realize that in order to study cyber physical security, you really have to understand physics. You really have to understand mechanics and control theory. Not cyber, not hacking, not the traditional kind of skills that we in cybersecurity area will have to gain. So I personally find this fascinating. So that's why I did not hesitate a second to agree to serve as the moderator of this panel. So today we're going to talk about the security of autonomous vehicles and more broadly security of smart transportation systems, smart autonomous systems. So I'm the moderator. I am a professor in the computer science department. I'm also the interim director of CERIAS. So I would like to quickly introduce my panelists. First, we have Dr. Susan Goshlich. She is a senior fellow at Raytheon. And Mr. Michael Imel, he is the group manager of autonomous product cybersecurity at General Motors. Mr. Charles Timko, he's an R&D cybersecurity engineer at Analog Devices Incorporation. And finally, I have Professor Brendan Pitts, assistant professor at the School of Industrial Engineering at Purdue. So I will let each of our panelists to give a more specific introduction about their work, and then I will let them give a kind of a position statement. And I did prepare some kind of questions that I would like each of them to respond to. So maybe I will just briefly, mention some of the questions, and then I will open the floor for the audience to ask them more questions. I hope to make this really interactive and hopefully entertaining and maybe controversial. I don't know. So we'll see. So I'm personally interested in knowing, the comment and the vision from each of you on the panel. The first one is, what are some of the unique challenges, right, in smart vehicle security? And these are I'm asking about the new challenges that do not exist in the traditional cybersecurity domain. So what are the unique challenges in smart vehicle security? And then I wonder, I would like to know, whether they feel optimistic or pessimistic. So what is their outlook, right, in this field? Are there, too many risk factors? Shall we proceed despite all the, risks or, issues or incidents that happened recently? And finally, how smart, right, do you want our autonomous vehicle to be? Should they be just fully automatic, fully driverless, or we want to have, human intervention? And finally, what are some of the most promising approaches, directions toward the ultimate security and reliability of a smart vehicle? So these are my personal questions. I believe the audience will have more. So let's, start with our panelists' position statements. Susan?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And does this work? Excellent. So if you stop me in the hallway at work and ask me, how are you going to protect smart vehicles from doing damage, I would just tell you off the cuff, go look at SP NIST Special Publication 853, version 4. Version 5 is coming out soon. This is a document commonly known as the Risk Management Framework. It's a really fabulous, well put together document. And essentially, it gives you a bunch of controls and ways of selecting controls. I would say maybe you need to develop a vehicle overlay to tell you which controls are important and so forth. And you can go through all that, but as The Economist had a special report a couple weeks ago, they said, we have to assume everything's going to be hackable. We can do everything in the world to protect it, but something this important, my position is, let's start thinking about, certainly we got to require all that, but what happens if it gets hacked? That's where we really need to focus some attention. So what I'm looking at here, and my colleagues here from GM and from other companies probably know more about this than the cybersecurity people do. Vehicle safety is a very long, it has been around for a long time. There's been a lot of good work done in the automotive industry, in the airplane industry, and so forth. So we need to be able to figure out how to bring those two together. This past summer, I worked as a cybersecurity lead on, I got feedback, a couple, some related pursuits where I got to work with some nuclear surety people. And I showed them my RMF document. I was so proud of my 462 pages. For them, this seems to be the table of contents for the documents they have to look at. So there's an awful lot that's been done and said about safety and surety and things like that. And I think the cybersecurity community has to get smarter on what's going on there. But the basics are here. How do you protect the really, critical safety equipment, the lights, the turn signals, the brakes? We all know about the famous Toyota unintended acceleration control, which turns out to be a problem with their fly-by-wire system. the kill switch, things like this. You don't want, kill switch sounds good, but you certainly don't want the car killing when it's in the middle of fast-moving traffic, for instance. So we're going to have to figure out how to particularly protect those systems. We need to come up with extensive monitoring, along the lines of a collision may occur. How can you avoid, even if something manages to take over the car, or are there collision avoidance systems that could maybe counteract some of that? Look at post-crash survivability, which the car companies and the airplane companies. My brother on the commercial side of Boeing, who's also worked for GM, has told me that he thought, all the survivability at GM was crazy, and then he got into the airplane world, and when you look at all the standards on fire retardants and so forth, and airplanes, there's a lot of good work that has been done, and we just need to look at making sure that works right. We've had various people talk about supply chain security. This is if you have an automated car, we probably going to have to have some regulation that says you have to go get authorized parts, authorized service, authorized inspections to make sure that your car isn't being hacked and so forth. Now, what that doesn't say is if I leave my car parked in a parking garage and someone comes in and, we've seen the movies where they put bombs under the car, right? So what's to stop someone from modifying the car when it's parked somewhere? We're probably going to have to, and I think maybe I got onto this in my next line, we're going to have to find ways to monitor our vehicles, even manually driven vehicles. Start using our, anyone who knows anything about persistent surveillance in the audience probably knows there really are surveillance cameras everywhere. So do we need to start looking at those surveillance cameras and start finding ways to detect malicious behavior happening to some of these automatic cars, or manual cars, manually driven cars? I believe that as we move from person-driven cars to automated-driven cars, the number of accidents that occur and the number of overall deaths is probably going to go down substantially. But when we do have accidents, they're probably going to be far more horrific than what we're used to. And that's been proposed by various analysis out there. So we're going to have to start looking at new ways of protecting ourselves, new ways of protecting these vehicles. We're going to have to change public safety, and we're not going to be able to take public safety budgets and triple them or quintuple them to take account for these autonomous vehicles. We're going to have to find savings where we're currently spending money and find new ways to spend money to do this increased surveillance and so forth. And as we look at how things change, I think the really hard part is going to be the transition. There's going to be the current stage right now where we have public safety that's really 100% aimed at manually driven cars. In the future, we're going to have probably 100% autonomous driven cars, and then there's going to be this transition period where we're going to have both manually driven cars and autonomous driven cars on the road. But if you think about a lot of what we do for public safety, as you're driving through Lafayette, you're running into all these traffic cones because we need to keep people out of these lanes. It could be once we have autonomous vehicles, they just get sent restrictions to their computers, and the computers won't let them drive in. So we may be able to save a lot of money on placement of traffic cones, collection of traffic cones, detours, and so forth by just pushing it out to the cars. And maybe we can take some of this money that we're saving on routine stuff we do today and figure out how to better use it to protect the supply chain and to protect malicious behavior in the future. And of course, the real challenge is what are we going to do in the transition between automated cars and manual cars and automated cars. Well, with that,
All right, thanks, Susan. Well, the one thing I'll say about the traffic cones, I'm always going to have my 72 Impala and I'm always going to expect those traffic cones to be out there. So, and I honestly, I think that's GM's stance as well. We're not expecting any kind of changes in any kind of infrastructure or anything like that. But I'll do my little soapbox. I think I'll answer some of the questions that were raised. Little brief, quick excerpt about me. I did graduate at Purdue. I actually went to school to be in electrical engineering. I was expecting to come out of school working on like high voltage power line systems. I was an electrician in my former life, and I thought, let's take it to the next level and become an engineer. It might make more money, and turns out it wasn't. But at any rate, it was a good transition for me. So, long story short, now I'm in General Motors, and now I'm working on cybersecurity in the autonomous space. So I'll talk about my area. Our CEO, Mary Barra, she has gone on record multiple times and said we're going to see more change in the next 5 or 10 years in the automotive industry than we have seen in the last 10 years. And personally, I think nowhere is that true in autonomous and cybersecurity. So we've got a lot of work to do in our space. And she's made that very clear to us that she's reliant on both cybersecurity and autonomous, so I get it from both angles. And she's made it very clear that we have to win in this segment. So. Like we were saying earlier, cybersecurity is new for us, right? At General Motors, it's probably about 10 years old. Believe it or not, we've been working on it for a while. It's been really viable maybe the last 5 years, where we've actually started to make some changes into our products that you're driving today. But and most of the stuff in this forum has not really been vehicle focused or really anything up here for our panel, and that's fine, right? And we knew that going in. We knew that. If you look at the people that work in our organization, very few of them have backgrounds in like what you guys have. And that's fine, because again, like we were talking, David, you were saying earlier, there's this technical deficit in the world, and there's just not enough people to come in and, one, want to work in automotive, and two, have this knowledge to work in the IT space, or in this security space. So we've made do with what we have. We've leaned on all the things that you guys have designed and worked on. We've taken it, we've adapted it, we've modified it, we've scaled it down in many cases, because a lot of the times our computers that are in our car, that run our cars, are no bigger than these microphones right here, and they're low power, they're low processor, they don't have a lot of memory, and you try to get a product engineer to put more memory in a controller, it's like you're asking to pull his teeth or something. It's ridiculous. So we do have that challenge, and we also have the challenge that our supply chain is they've been out there for 20, 50 years or whatever, right? And they don't know about security. They've never just what's security? What I did safety, isn't that enough? So they don't understand the security side of it. So General Motors, I feel, is probably leading the way of educating our supply chain, which the rest of the industry, of course, benefits from that as well. And we're also educating our own product engineering teams on how to become more security savvy. I kind of think of it as like where safety was maybe 20 years ago. Nobody really thought about safety. Safety was kind of, we'll figure that out after we get it to work. Well, that's not true today. And I think somebody else mentioned yesterday that why do I have to tell people that I have to teach them how to do security? It's not. Why do I have to make it their job? Well, it's got to be everybody's job, right? We have to design in security into these designs. Otherwise, it's not going to work, and we realize that. And we're slowly, everybody refers to GM as this giant ship, right? It takes a lot to turn this giant ship, and we're getting there. I've only been in this organization for about 3 years, and I've seen a lot of acceptance. You could argue maybe it's because we're beating them with a very big stick on, no, you have to do this, but they are accepting it. They're starting to realize that, yeah, you do have to do these kinds of things. So one of the particular areas that I was going to refer to, and I didn't know how autonomous you wanted this conversation to be, but one particular area that we really focus on, and you kind of touched on it, Susan, was diagnostics. So we have to make our vehicles serviceable. You have to build the cars. And as a result of publishing some of that service information, malicious people can take a hold of that stuff and do some bad things for it. So another perfect example of where we're trying to educate our supply chain, again, as well as our own product people. I don't want to say like we are all knowing up here at General Motors. But we got to I always tell my engineers, I said, put yourself in that dark place. Put yourself in like, well, what could you do? What could you do with that brake bleed diagnostic, while they're going down the road? So you get your supply chain, you get your manufacturing representatives, you get your service representatives, and you put them all in a room and say, okay, look, here's what will happen. Or you ask them, you say, well, what if? What if I execute that diagnostic at 50 miles an hour going down the road? Well, nobody's going to do that. Well, guess what? We have connected cars now, folks. And I guess so our audience participation. Who can tell me the first year that we had a connected vehicle at General Motors? Raise your hands. Come on, throw out a name. Well, what year was our first connected car? I heard 95 back there. That's pretty close. 2000. One more guess. 98. So if you guys average it out, you're pretty close. It's 96. So over 20 years now, we've had connected cars. And a lot of people don't realize that we've had a connected car. Was anybody talking about this stuff 20 years ago? No. And that's why we happily went on and made our diagnostics, and we didn't care when or how or who was going to execute them. Now, come 2017, right, we have to worry about that. So we get all those people in a room and we say, okay, well, what if? What if somebody were to execute those diagnostics? And like he was saying, it's not a security question anymore. It becomes a risk question. Like, well, how can I not run this at 50 miles an hour? Well, do you need to be the car running? Does the car have to be idling? Can the car be in park? So you talk through that and you throw in a set of rationalities, or you throw in a set of conditions that still achieves the serviceability or the manufacturing ability of the vehicle and keeps your customer safe if by chance somebody were to execute that diagnostic remotely. Another condition that we have that's in our field, the technology you guys all have in your pocket or sitting on your table there, you're probably not going to have that thing in 5 years, probably not even 2 years from now. Again, I'm still driving my 72 Impala convertible, and I've got 9 cars at home that I love to drive, and I'm going to be driving those things forever. So we have to develop these security measures and these security designs that have to be viable and rock solid for 20, 30 years from now. And so how do you get your supply chain to do that? That's going to be a challenge for us. We have a tough time just getting a supplier to recompile their software a year later after we launch a product, because we found, might not have been security related, we might have said, well, the performance is not quite right, so we need to recompile that code. Well, we don't have that code anymore. Right? So we got to start educating our supply chain that we have to set this up from the start with our contracts and education that, no, you have to keep those tools. Somehow we got to figure out how to keep those tools, keep those compilers in a state where they're going to execute or create and compile that same software exactly. And then we're going to run into challenges with, again, with our tiny micros and memory size that we have. At some point, you're just going to reach a limit that you can't cram more stuff into that controller to fix those patches. So OTA, everybody says, yeah, OTAs, just flash it. Just put new software in it. Software's free. It's not that easy, right? So we gotta work with our supply chain to make that kind of stuff happen. A quick example on trying to foresee into the future of how strong stuff is going to be. Back in probably early 90s, mid 90s, somewhere around there, the emissions regulators said, you know what, OEMs, you need to figure out a way to stop people from manipulating your controllers, because people were doing it in the field. You could call it hacking. I mean, nobody called it that at the time, but they were, ethical hackers at the time, and they were just tweaking their proms to get a couple miles per gallon extra, or maybe 10 extra horsepower. Maybe they bumped up the top speed on their car a little bit. But in a sense, they were hacking it, and the government saw this, or the emissions agencies saw this, and they said, you guys got to stop that. It's your problem now, because you certified it to be with these conditions, and now they're operating the car in these conditions, and now you're no longer meeting, or you may not be meeting your emission standards anymore. So we came up, at least General Motors came up with this brilliant 2-byte algorithm to combat this, and we put this on our programming routine, and we said, nobody's ever going to figure out 65,000 combinations. That should be good forever, right? Well, fast forward now 20, 25 years later, you can pretty much find and those algorithms, I probably loosely use the word algorithms, they were just lookup tables. They were really simple math from seed value to key value, no cryptography involved whatsoever. But you can find those all over the internet now. Once you calculate or find a couple of examples, you can pretty much calculate all 65,000 combinations. And people have posted that on the internet. All these perfect, line for line. Here's what you do to get 10 extra horsepower out of your '97 Camaro with the LT1 or whatever. So that was kind of our first attempt at it. And then I think back on that. I'm like, okay, the stuff that we're doing today now in 2016, 17, and coming up in our next architecture jump, how good is it going to be? I don't know. I hope it's good enough. I hope with the advanced cryptography algorithms and stuff that we're using now that they're much more bulletproof than what the low-tech stuff we were using in the past. But I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I don't want to get too far ahead. So we were talking about the challenges with autonomous cars. One of the biggest challenges I see is not really a security issue, but it's all the sensor integration, or what do we call it? We call it sensor fusion, I think is what we have, right? We have all these different sensors looking at different things, and the attack vectors that are coming in on those are all new to us. We've never seen this kind of stuff before. In our simple minds, I guess I can say this because GM's already published pictures of this car, but we have LiDAR units right on the top of our car, and we thought, well, what happens if you point a laser pointer to it? Will that really piss it off? Well, we found out that it's really not that easy. So kind of like what you were talking about before, we're doing, we're using like NIST 800-30 risk assessment type philosophies, and we're just going through it and going through all this stuff to find out, well, what's really bad, what's really not. Let's work on all the really bad stuff. But there's a whole slew of stuff that I could probably talk about for hours on the new use cases with autonomous cars, the new technology that we've got to try and figure out how to secure. And I think one of my concerns, like you were saying, is this technology and this customer demand is moving faster than what we can secure it and stay ahead of. So I think that's what keeps me up at night. And I did start this job with a full head of dark hair.
Well, I'm just starting this job, but hopefully I'll still have my full head of black hair in just a few more years.
You won't.
All right. But as I said, I'm a new professor here in industrial engineering, and I'm coming actually from a different side of things. So my background is in human factors and ergonomics, where we are looking at how do we design technologies, interfaces, displays. Can you guys hear me in the back? No? Okay. Okay. So how can we, can you hear me now? Okay. How do we design technologies, displays, interfaces to support users, to support their limitations, but also capitalize on their strengths, okay? And I am primarily interested in human automation interaction, which is the topic of this panel, but in this idea of cognitive ergonomics. So we're looking at how do we design things centered around how people think. And of course, in our field, human factors and ergonomics, for years now, there's been a lot of talk about what is this going to look like, cybersecurity, possible hacking. They've talked about it in aviation, for example, and now it is moving definitely into the direction of vehicles. But one of the things that we've tried to do is really try to think about what can we learn, what can we take away from other domains, okay? And so if we look at aviation, for example, when they introduced automated flight systems to cockpits, there were two things. There was this paper in the, I think the 70s that was called Ironies of Automation. And there were two tasks that were left for humans to do once these highly automated systems were introduced. That was to constantly monitor the system to make sure it was functioning the way it's supposed to. And the other thing was to take over or to intervene whenever the automation got stuck or whenever it wasn't programmed to do things, then the human needed to step in. And so we're kind of using that same train of thought, and especially in this interim period, to think about what is that going to look like for autonomous vehicles. And so in human factors and cognitive ergonomics, we've tried to use display design to divide people's attention in terms of interruption management, attention management. How do we capture someone's attention if they're doing a task? How do we capture their attention, okay, have them switch perform that task and switch back to a task that they're doing. Okay, and we can think about this, for the hacking example. Let's just say that someone is driving down the highway and all of a sudden the vehicle is going in a direction that they didn't anticipate or that it wasn't programmed for. So as human factors researchers, one of our responsibilities is to figure out how do we, number one, detect that a threat has happened, or that a threat has occurred, alert the person about what has happened, and then, if possible, give them some kind of decision tool to help them overcome it. Okay, and when I thought about this last night, one of the things I was thinking about is the Chase Bank example. So I have Chase, and there have been 2 separate times where there was some fraudulent activity on my account, and I immediately got an alert saying, "Is this you? If it is, click yes. If not, then click no." And then the account was completely frozen. Okay, and then a new card had to be ordered, so on and so forth. And so my thinking is, how can we now implement that into these autonomous vehicles? That kind of structure, okay, where we're not trusting the person to be able to detect a threat on their own, but where the system, as we continue to increase complexity and these systems become more intelligent, they will, I believe, get to the point where they can detect threats. And then our question again, as human factors specialists, is to how do we alert the person, give them some kind of decision support to where they can kind of recoup from that. Some other things I'm interested in more broadly are aging and technology. So a lot of the research that I'm pursuing has to do with, as we get older, again, how do we design for older adult limitations, but also make use of the strengths that they have. A lot of the times I think we don't really think about that. But one of the questions that has come up, for example, people talk about how older adults don't want to use technologies. They don't want to pay bills online. They don't want to use cell phones, and that's definitely not true. Okay, there is a segment of older adults who agree with that and say, well, you know what? With all of the things that I'm seeing on the news, with all of the things we're talking about at this symposium, maybe I'll just continue to mail my bills paper-wise, right? So that is some concern. How do we build up trust in automation? How do we build up trust in technology with them, for example? That's a research area people are looking at. And then I just want to go back to this idea about not relying on people to be able to necessarily self-detect threats, okay? As computer scientists, as industrial engineers, we really need to be able to do the best that we can to detect threats and inform the person. So I think just going from here, one thing I like about this job is that it is very collaborative. And so this is not a problem that's going to be solved with just one field. Computer scientists won't be able to do it all alone. Human factors, people won't be able to do it all alone. And so as long as we're bringing together those perspectives and thinking about how do we view the issue, how do you view the issue, and get centered around that, I think we can make some good progress. And I'll leave it at that.
How about now? Can you hear me now? How about now? Well, I'm gonna head down there. Steal this from you. Can you hear me? Okay. Just because I can't see the slides very well, and I should be able to because I'm young, but I have terrible eyesight. So yeah. So my name is Charles Timko. I work at Analog. Not really that important for this, but I've been in the trenches for the past couple of years, looking at vehicle security and actually reverse engineering vehicles. So I thought, why not look at it from a little bit of a historical perspective of where we've been. Speaking of security, right? Ford Model T and the DeLorean, from a security perspective, the threats kind of stay the same, right? We've just got a physical asset that you have to protect. Maybe it's convertible and someone can hop in and try to steal the car, or you have to pick the lock of the keys or whatever. But the difference between these two really gets to be the functional safety aspect, and that's something that was mentioned earlier, is that functional safety for vehicles has improved drastically over the years. But we look at today, we still have that improved functional safety, and the feature set has drastically improved as well. We get advanced driver assistance, advanced driver assistance systems. But at the same time, we're looking at Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek and the GPAC and the unintentional acceleration. And the irony is working with OEMs and getting really interesting questions from them about why do I care about security in some of these systems. It really comes down to, yes, you have functional safety in my mind. Yes, you have that. But security doesn't completely fall underneath that. Right? Functional safety is about the vehicle in motion and protecting the inhabitants of the vehicle. But what about when the vehicle's off? And you may have something that's calling home and getting new diagnostic information, or getting new software downloaded, or heaven forbid, a hacker breaking into it and installing ransomware, and now you're paying $10 every single time you want to turn your car on. That kind of terrifies me a little bit. And the remote threats now have really increased as the attack surface has grown, as we get a lot of remote services for the vehicles. But and I think this has been mentioned several times already, IT security tools, they don't map to this domain. They don't make any sense here, right? You're talking about a cyber-physical system, not a network of web services, even though they might be using some. So yeah, the threats here are a little bit different. The loss is different, right? If a machine gets hacked in a current IT system, you're losing maybe your intellectual property, maybe your data. No one's going to die, hopefully. But here, you're talking about the potential loss of life. And it gets really, really scary at that point, right? Because now you're not just talking about a car that had the ability for the driver to brake and getting into the future with autonomous vehicles. What about an attacker taking that and automating it to do their own will and driving it, maybe accelerating it into some other vehicle, or cutting off other vehicles in a dangerous manner that humans would react poorly to? And so, what the future looks like. SAE's got their automation levels, and we're getting close, if not already getting there with Tesla and level 5 fully autonomous vehicles, when human interaction is only necessary for turning the car on, setting your destination, and letting it go. It seems really convenient, but people don't pay attention, and then you happen to get into automotive accidents that killed you. Referring specifically, if you're not aware, the person that was killed in the Tesla accident was watching a video, not paying attention to the road. And then you get, mobile apps are becoming more standard with vehicles, of turning your car on, unlocking it, locating it, that sort of thing. And I can imagine, at least, that when we start getting fully autonomous vehicles, you're going to be using your app like an Uber app, and you're going to be calling it to your location. What's to say that a hacker doesn't use that kind of a feature set to call it over the border and steal it, right? So the future kind of gets a little bit scary and concerning there. And then we've got vehicle to everything. Yes, it's been under development for the past several years, but it's based off of the stimuli from the infrastructure or other vehicles to make decisions. Granted, that's not the only thing it uses to make decisions, thankfully, but if it began to use pieces and rely heavily on infrastructure to give it information about the traffic, an attacker could use that to reroute people through maybe a dangerous neighborhood, or lie about, well, those vehicles that are there really aren't there. And then we get to remote diagnostics, and I think there's a lot of privacy concerns there, right? If someone could hack in and pay attention to your diagnostics, they'd gain enough information about the vehicle. As long as they know where you started from, they could build your entire path of travel. Right, you have all of the inputs that the user gave to the vehicle even now, or if it's fully autonomous, you'd just be able to get where the target destination is and maybe even the GPS coordinates. But how do we get to the future? And I just, some additional thoughts to add to it of, automotive design. We sit here thinking about security for it. Automotive design is about 5 years out. So if you're trying to design top down and integrating security in the design as part of the engineering process, it gets very difficult, right? Because Miller Valsek comes in and points out a really big problem, and now we're trying to figure out how do we fit that in to the next model year so that we solve that problem in the future. And now we're trying to wedge things in, but for all other vehicles, it's not going to really appear in the design for another 5 years. And then you can't, oh yeah, I already said that. So, and then to diagnostics' point, in the US, we have to remember right to repair laws, which really makes things even more complicated because that requires diagnostics to be open and allow anybody to do maintenance on their own vehicle. So, if we start adding security in and start resolving a lot of the really wide open vulnerabilities of being able to just replace firmware out on ECUs or not have signed code or something like that, how do you do it in such a way that the home user can modify their vehicle, but only their vehicle and nobody else's vehicle? And then is there a way to define that the software on the ECU is part of the ECU and can't be replaced, and thus part of the right to repair law then becomes, well, you can replace that ECU, but not the software that's on it. So a little more thought there. And will NHTSA ever add security to the 5-star rating? There's been discussion on that, and at the same time, security assessment is kind of subjective. How do you make it objective, and how do you make it objective in such a way that it maps to all vehicle platforms in existence, right? Because you've got semis, which are different than Corvettes, which are going to be different than an Impala from 72. And I also think the business model is going to be challenged here. I know we're not necessarily talking about business, but I think the business model is going to be challenged a little bit because you can't sell cars that we do normally, right? Now we have to start packaging security in and security updates for the life of the vehicle. And when you think about the average life of a vehicle is about 11 years right now, it becomes a really hard problem to solve of, well, what's security going to look like in 11 years? Where do we solve the post-quantum crypto problem in the future? And as was said earlier, I think it was Michael that mentioned it, the fact that the microcontrollers on the vehicles in the ECUs are already maxed out. Now do we have to start planning in for having the ability to expand those? They only have maybe 50% utilization before we get there. And Microsoft and Apple, yes, this is IT, but they've changed the way that you view software. You don't own it anymore, you borrow it. And they will continue to provide you security licenses, you pay a subscription fee, and just a thought there. I'm optimistic that we can solve these problems and ultimately get to a secure vehicle platform. But I think it's something that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and needless to say, a lot of money. And who gets to pay for this piece? Is it the OEMs taking the cut or taking the hit, which I doubt, or is it going to be the end consumer that needs to really be educated on understanding that I need to pay for this because these feature sets allow for hackers to do things they weren't able to do in the past? Thanks.
Thank you all. And I seem to have sensed various levels of optimism based on your position statement. So with the remaining time of the panel, I would like to open the floor so that so that the audience can ask questions. And so at this time, I would like to get the questions from.
Charles, you can't answer this question. My name's John Walsh. I'm with Analog Devices. We are going through a process internally to develop a framework for a security assurance program. And we serve multiple sectors. And one of the concerns we have as we're looking at automotive and other connected vehicles is, especially for some of these safety critical functions, what is the thought process around I may detect that we have an anomaly or we have a threat present. For example, we get a brake command and the brake command goes to the brakes. What's the policy if we think it may not be an authenticated command? So, one of the big issues as we're starting to get into this is it's not just about security, it's about, do I apply the brakes? And if I don't apply the brakes, we may actually have a real situation occurring, and we have a fatality occur because of security. So, and we could talk about heart monitors and all these other things where functional safety versus critical things, and how do we address those, and what have you guys done in terms of thinking through that and the thought leadership when it comes to, how do we address those kind of situations in our architectures?
I thought you said don't have me answer it.
Oh, I'll take a stab at one of the comments you said about, and you kind of answered your own question, in my opinion. Right now, I can't necessarily do it with the technology we have, but at some point we will have authenticated messages, right? Just like you said, if I'm just going to, everybody probably here knows that the CAN networks on these vehicles is wide open. There's no security in it. It's just it's a Wild West on there, right? But there's ways we can authenticate that stuff, and we're moving towards that. We also have built in rationalities, like you said, or like I was saying earlier. If you suddenly get this brake command, well, where did it come from? Did it come in from the right path? Right? Because if it came in from maybe what we consider maybe our dirty side, where our connected components are, I may not trust that guy. I'm not going to listen to that guy. But if it came in from this more private network that has a little bit more physical security on it, maybe, or a little bit more redundancy on it, I'll listen to that guy. But the end answer is it's got to be an authenticated message, and then hope that you have enough security around that authentication that you believe it every time.
Am I on? Okay. So I agree. I think that in the DoD space, there's a lot of thought on this about unintended and attended. Whenever someone takes no unintended action ever happens, and when there is an intended action, it happens as well. So it's both the negative and positive side. There's been a lot of thought around this, but ultimately it boils down to layers of security. You protect things, at every layer, everything gets protected all along the development cycle into operation and maintenance and so forth. And when you build all this security, then ultimately your software has to do what makes the most sense, assuming, it's got a valid authenticated command, not a invalid authenticated command, if I'm making sense.
Yeah.
Throwing too many adjectives at it, but
I think so.
There was a statement earlier that with fully autonomous vehicles, someone expected that the frequency of accidents would decrease, but of the accidents that remain, the severity would increase. I was wondering, what's the intuition behind that expectation, and do all the panelists agree?
I know you said that.
I
I don't agree with it.
So I read The Economist, and they've done a lot of analysis on this, and I think that's what their conclusion has been, is that and I don't have their sources in front of me, but you can probably Google them. The human error is going to go way down, one would think, if autonomy's over. It's more of an unknown when you have autonomous crashes, what's really going to occur.
Yeah, the reason I would kind of disagree is, at least from an autonomous vehicle's perspective, we're not going to put a car on the road that we don't feel safe to go 65 miles an hour. So now, can I stop some crazy guy that wants an insurance claim to slam into my car? No. And I feel bad about the Uber story, right? Because could the Uber car have gotten out of the way of that? I don't know. But, it's unfortunate that kind of stuff hits the news, and now it looks bad from the autonomous perspective. But I just know that we've got a very structured set of requirements that we have to get to, and we're slowly ramping that up. And if we don't feel comfortable, if we don't feel that car is safer than a human on the road, we're not going to put it on the road. And I know that our mantra is going to be, it's going to have to be safer than any other driver on the road. So I don't think it'll be more horrific. I think we'll see less accidents. But of the few that happen, I don't think there'll be any statistically difference, because I hope in my mind that it's going to be not the autonomous car's fault. It's going to be something else hitting it, something else out of the blue that it couldn't avoid. But yeah, I don't think they'll be more horrific.
Okay, thank you.
Kurt Hadley with the University of Illinois. First, thank you all for being here. So my question as we look at autonomous vehicles is that speed of reaction. We have farm equipment out there now that's autonomous. We have aircraft that are autonomous, but as a person who spends a decent amount of time commuting and has probably logged over 2 million miles on the road now, I look at those bad decisions that people make, whether it is an evasive maneuver, somebody cutting them off in traffic, the idiot on their phone, whatever it might be, and where do we see that human-machine interface that helps those decisions improve and not get worse?
You try it out?
So,
Give me a break.
So what a lot of people in this field have been talking about is that the human is still there. Okay, they're not the primary one lane keeping speed. They're there, but they're there.
Am I turning on that mic?
Oh yeah, they're there. But they're there in the backup case, and I know a lot of people probably hate to hear me say that, but it's true. And we're saying in this interim period, I'm not talking about 20 years out when we've got this thing under control, and it's possible that the human may not be there. That's what that's what people are looking to. But we're saying from now and for the next 20 years, we're feeling that it's critical to leave the human there in terms of being able to monitor and take over. And just the mere fact of having them sitting there monitoring is and having the vehicle kind of do on its own will reduce accidents like we're talking about. What we're thinking about is how do we now, if the person is engaged in a different task, if they now have the ability to text or to eat or to fall asleep, how do we create displays? And I didn't talk about this, but we use these multimodal displays, basically light, sound, and vibrations, okay, to present information. How can we support situation awareness? So basically being able to alert people at different times about what the vehicle is doing to give them enough time to take over. So there have been a lot of studies that have looked at how long does it take someone to take over control of a vehicle, and a lot of people are saying that the time is so large in terms of milliseconds that we can't get it down short enough for a person to be able to reliably take over. And so what we're saying is, as ergonomists, well then how can we keep the person engaged? How can we provide them with the right situation awareness about what the vehicle is doing? And alert them previously, okay, not right when some mode fails or when the automation fails, but how do we give them that in enough time to be able to handle it? I don't know if that answers the question.
You're moving that direction.
All right.
Well, let me try, I guess, because your question was about fully autonomous vehicles, and I'd say my CEO would disagree that we're going to have autonomous cars on the road, driverless, well before that.
Okay.
But to answer your question, the reaction time. So they're telling us, again, I don't design the car. I'm just hoping I'm securing the car well enough. But they're telling us that they think that our reaction time of actually doing something like send a steering command, send a brake command, might be slightly less than what a human could probably do it in. Where we're going to make up that time, however, is we're going to have a full view of everything around us, right? So you don't have eyes in the back of your head. I'm probably with you. I drive a lot, but I know I can't see what's coming up behind me, but an autonomous car will, and it'll be able to be ready and react accordingly to that. So that's where we keep thinking that we're going to get a better overall reaction time. One of the questions that I was asked a while back was, am I going to be stuck behind one of these cars waiting for it to decide if it needs to turn left or right? I'll be honking at it? No, I don't think so, right? Unless it's one of these orange barrels or whatever, if a tree fell in front of it and it doesn't know what to do. But from a reaction perspective, I think we'll be better than a human. And again, we'll have a much better input and process all that input much quicker and better than what I think a human could do from so many different sources: vision, radar, LiDAR, all that stuff, and vehicle infrastructure, whatever it may be.
Hi, I'm from ADI as well. I have a question about the infrastructure. Do we have autonomous self-driving lanes or self-parking garages. The problem with like mixing autonomous cars with human-driven cars is that can make a lot of errors, and that could possibly cause a lot more accidents as well when you put autonomous driving cars with self-driving cars. And I presume that there must be a switch for someone to be able to switch between letting the car drive autonomously and taking things over. So you could make that switch anytime, I presume. So do we have the infrastructure to support that? I mean, you see a lot of sci-fi movies, cars driving vertically as well. Where are we in that? I mean, do we have a plan to get there?
Yeah, so I know GM is not relying on any of that. So we're making an autonomous vehicle, and yeah, at first it's gonna have a driver in it, but we're not gonna expect the passenger to be doing any of that kind of stuff. The passenger is gonna get in, go to whatever destination they want to do, and we're never gonna expect them to take over the wheel or anything like that, because like you said, especially because they're gonna be in the back seat. They're not gonna have time to jump up there and do anything. Hell, they'll probably be passed out, right? Because that's why they're there in the first place. But we don't expect anything like that to take place. So we will have, where I see that we're going to have manual driving is like in the service bay, or if I need to inch the car a little bit over to get to a charging station or a fueling station or something like that. So that's where humans will get in the vehicle through a authorized connection. We'll put the car into a manual mode, because again, we have to secure that, right? We don't want anybody just walking up, flipping it to manual and going, hey, look what I got. So some authorized person will get in the vehicle, put it in manual mode, get it where it needs to go, and then once it's done with its charging or whatever, it gets turned back into autonomous mode, and then they walk away from it, and then it's out in the wild with no driver.
So do you expect us to see, say, autonomous driving lanes in the future, like carpool lanes?
Let me take that.
Yeah, I would assume so.
So I've read about studies really aimed at how do we solve the traffic problem in this country, and basically they say if we have automated cars, we can close the gap between cars. They could maybe be driving along at 65 miles an hour with 2 inches of separation between them, and that's a really scary thought, but to be honest, the technology would probably support it. Right. So the question is as a society, do we want to spend the money it would cost to get there? And as a society, the question we're not even asking right now is the legislation. And it all gets to, if you're going to have an autonomous car, are you going to be required to go through special inspections? I mean, it seems that would be a natural thing to do, but will the legislation keep up with the technology or enable the technology to do everything the technology can do, and to solve our traffic problems, to solve our safety problems, our security problems, and so forth.
I would just say, talking about kind of making the analogy to the HOV lanes, there's nothing special about those other than a few added reflectors on the ground. I don't think, if there was to be a special autonomous lane, if they put some kind of infrastructure, like a vehicle-to-infrastructure, vehicle-to-vehicle in it, that's fine, we'll probably utilize it, but GM is not expecting anything like that to happen. If we get our own lane, great, we'll take it. And,
take advantage.
Take advantage of it, right.
Yeah, because I used to live in California, and we used to drive a lot between LA and the Bay Area, and there have been talks about building a bullet train for years and years and years. I mean, it would be nice to have an autonomous driving lane where
we have
you
those,
could
it's called a Corvette.
All right.
Thanks.
So yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion. I definitely learned a lot myself. I was actually thinking of asking about your opinion on third-party reverse engineering and hacking or vetting of a commodity autonomous vehicle system, but we run out of time. So I will like to continue our discussion offline. And so this also wraps up the panel discussion on secure autonomous vehicle. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you very much. And let's thank our panelists.